9, Mrs. Calloway said, loud enough that the whole post office heard it. 9 men, and that Jane Aldrich turned every last one away at the gate. Jane heard it from the doorway and kept walking. She had bread rising at home, and no patience for other people's arithmetic. It was the autumn of 1883, in the high, dry country outside Callow Creek, Nevada, where the sage ran silver gray to the base of the mountains, and the wind moved through the grass like something with business to attend to. Jane had homesteaded the place herself after her husband Thomas died of fever 3 years prior. She had proved the claim, built the fence, sunk the second well. She had done it all without asking a soul for help, and she intended to keep doing it that way. The 9 men Mrs. Calloway counted had come one by one over 2 years. Some had heard Jane had a solid 160 acres and needed a partner. Some had heard she was a widow not yet 40, with good hands and a clear eye. One had come with a letter of introduction from a pastor in Utah. Another had come with a wagon full of furniture, certain she'd say yes before he'd even stated his intention. Jane had said no to every one of them. Not out of spite, not out of grief held too long. She said no, because every man who knocked on her gate had already decided what she was going to be to him, and she had no interest in becoming what someone else had already decided. She said it plainly to the last one, a decent enough fellow from Elko, when he asked why she refused. She'd looked at him across the fence post and said, "I'm not a problem you can solve by showing up." He'd ridden off looking confused, and she'd gone back to her fencing. By October, the post at Callow Creek had a letter for her. She almost left it. She almost let it sit in the box another week. But something in the handwriting on the envelope, careful, unhurried, no flourish at all, made her pick it up. She carried it home and read it at the kitchen table while the stove ticked heat into the small room. The letter was from a man named Elias Croft. The gate Mrs. Calloway had heard about? Jane was the one who built it. She'd decide who, if anyone, ever came through. "The gate," said Elias's letter quietly, in its third line, "is yours to keep closed. I am only writing to say I am looking for work, not a wife. But I hear you have land that needs a second pair of hands, and I have hands. If you see fit to answer, I will be in Callow Creek through the end of the month." Jane read it twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she wrote back. She kept her reply to 2 sentences, the wage she could offer, and the day she expected him. She sealed the envelope, walked back to town, and mailed it before she could think better of it. She told herself it was purely practical. She had 40 acres of winter wheat to get in before the freeze, and her back had been sending her warnings she didn't want to acknowledge. She told herself all of this walking home, and she almost believed it. What she did not say, even to herself, was that the letter had been the first one in 3 years that asked nothing of her except the use of her land. Elias Croft arrived on a Tuesday, which was not the day she had named in her letter. He arrived on the correct day. It was Jane who had lost track of the date, so deep into the work of it that Tuesday and Wednesday had blurred together in the gray light of early November. She heard the horse before she saw the man. One horse, moving steady on the road, no wagon behind it, no furniture. She came around the side of the barn, and there he was at the gate, not opening it, not calling out, just standing with the reins in his hand, looking at the property with what she could only describe as a working man's assessment, the way a carpenter looks at a crooked wall, not with contempt, but with the quiet calculation of how much effort it would take to set it right. He was lean and not particularly tall, with the kind of weathering that comes from years of outdoor work rather than hard living. His coat was clean, his hat was old, he had a bedroll and a single saddlebag, and that was the whole of what he had brought. He spotted her when she came around the barn, and he took off the hat. "Mrs. Aldrich," he said, "I'm Elias Croft. "I see that," she said. He did not smile at the curtness. He waited. "The bunkhouse is behind the barn," she said. "Small but sound. There's a stove that draws well if you keep the damper halfway. Supper's at 6. I'll show you the wheat situation in the morning." "All right," he said. She turned to go back to what she'd been doing. "Mrs. Aldrich?" She stopped. "Thank you for answering the letter," he said. It was not a flattery. It was simply what it was. A man acknowledging a favor done, with the same plainness she had used in her reply. She nodded once and went back around the barn. That night at supper, which was venison stew and cornbread, they sat at opposite ends of a table meant for 6, and ate in the kind of quiet that is not comfortable, and is not hostile, and has not yet decided what it is. He ate everything on his plate and said the stew was good. She said she'd had better venison. He said he probably had too, but that wasn't what he meant. She looked at him. "I meant the cooking," he said, "not the deer." There was a small silence, and something in it shifted slightly. Not much, not enough to name, but it shifted. "There are biscuits if you want them," she said. He wanted them. November settled in around the place like a gray quilt being pulled up from the south. Elias was up before Jane most mornings, which surprised her, because she had always been the first one with a fire lit and boots on. She would come out of the house to find the stock already watered, the barn door wedged against the wind. Sometimes a stack of split wood moved from the yard to the covered lean-to so it would stay dry. He never mentioned doing these things. He simply did them. The wheat planting went faster with 2. She had known it would. That was the whole point of hiring him. But knowing a thing and seeing it happen are different experiences. Watching Elias work, she understood that he had done this kind of labor his whole life. He moved without wasted motion. He understood where she wanted the rows without her having to explain it twice. He asked questions when he needed to and did not ask them when he didn't. By the second week, she had stopped watching herself around him, which was a thing she had not expected to happen so soon. There was a morning in the 3rd week when the pump at the near well froze up before dawn. She was already out there by the time he came around the corner of the house, and he saw the problem in the same moment she did, and they worked it together without speaking much, him holding the lantern while she applied the hot water kettle, both of them in the gray cold with their breath making small clouds. When the water finally ran free again, he said, "Good well," and she said, "Thomas sank it in a dry summer. Got down 30 feet before he hit water," and Elias said, "Stubborn man," and she said, "Yes," and that was the first time she had said anything about Thomas to another person in longer than she could remember. Elias didn't pursue it. He took the lantern back to the barn and she stood by the well a moment, surprised by the way the word yes had come out of her, not with grief, not with resistance, just with the simple weight of something true. She did not examine this too closely. There was too much work. He fixed the broken shutter on the north window without being asked. He noticed the kitchen chair with the cracked leg and said one evening, "I could mend that if you have spare wood." She pointed to the stack behind the stove. He spent the better part of a Sunday afternoon fitting a new leg, sanding it smooth so it sat true on the floor, and when he set it back at the table he put it directly across from the chair she always used. Not next to hers, across from it, where someone would sit to talk. She said nothing about this, neither did he. The chair sat there, mended and waiting, and she set the supper dishes on the table and they ate as usual. But once, just once, she let herself notice that the chair had been placed where a person would sit if they intended to stay. Outside, the first hard freeze sealed the ground, and the nights got long. The trouble came from the west side, as trouble in that country usually did. A company out of Sacramento called the Western Irrigation Syndicate had been buying up water rights along Callow Creek for 2 years, and in early December a man named Garrett showed up at Jane's gate, not with a letter, not with a hat in his hand, but with a printed document and a pair of men standing behind him like decorative posts. Garrett was smooth in the way that means careful, not kind. He had a city coat and new boots and a way of smiling that did not involve his eyes at all. He said the syndicate had identified a discrepancy in the water access filing for Jane's property, that the creek right she had registered in 1880 was technically attached to the original timber claim, which had lapsed, and not to her homestead patent, which had not, and that this discrepancy meant the water right was, from a legal standpoint, open for reapplication. He made it sound like he was doing her a favor by explaining this. Jane had heard variations of this argument before, from other properties. She knew what it meant. If the syndicate controlled the creek access, they controlled the farm. Without water, the wheat died. Without the wheat, the cattle couldn't be maintained through summer. Without that, the land was dust. She kept her hands quiet at her sides and said, "I'll need to see that filing, the original one." "Of course," Garrett said. "We'd be happy to discuss." "I didn't ask to discuss," she said. "I asked to see the document." From around the side of the barn, Elias appeared. He hadn't been sent for. He had simply heard voices and come. He stopped at a respectful distance and stood with his arms loose at his sides, not threatening, not performing, just present, the way a solid fence post is present. Garrett glanced at him. The two men behind Garrett glanced at him. Elias looked back without any particular expression. Garrett's smile adjusted slightly. "Well," he said, "we'll be in contact, Mrs. Aldrich." He folded the document back into his coat. "There's time yet to resolve this favorably." He said the word favorably the way some men say it, meaning favorably for himself. When they had gone, Jane and Elias stood at the gate. "Water rights trouble," she said. It wasn't a question. "Sounds like it," he said. "I have the original filing in the house. Thomas kept everything. Then we start there." She looked at him. "This isn't your trouble, Elias." He picked up the fence post hook she'd set down and handed it back to her without theatrics. "You're paying me to keep this place running," he said. "If they take the water, the place doesn't run. That makes it my trouble too." He said it plainly. No drama in it, just the same logic he applied to everything. "Besides," he added, and there was something quiet in his voice that was not quite humor, and was not quite seriousness, but lived in the country between them. "I fixed that chair. I'd hate to see it go to waste." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. They spent the next 3 evenings at the kitchen table, Jane with Thomas's original filing papers and Elias with a copy of the county records he had ridden into Callow Creek to pull from the land office. He had a steadier hand for the fine print than she did. His eyes were younger by 6 years, he told her, without apology, and between them they found the language. The water right was not attached to the timber claim. It was attached to the parcel description in the original homestead survey, which predated the timber filing by 8 months. Garrett's company had relied on the county's condensed index, which had combined 2 references into one line and created the appearance of ambiguity where none existed in the original document. Jane wrote out the argument in her own hand, clear and spare. Elias read it back to her, making no changes to her meaning, only suggesting once that she move a sentence higher in the paragraph, so the strongest point landed first. She moved it. He was right. They rode into town together on a Friday morning and filed the response with the county clerk, a careful, unhurried man named Oates who read it with the deliberate thoroughness of someone who had seen syndicate documents before and was not impressed by them. He said he would send his finding to the land office in Carson City within the week. He looked over his glasses at Jane and said, "This is well argued, Mrs. Aldrich." Then he looked at Elias. "You a lawyer?" "No," Elias said. "Farmer?" "Yes," Elias said. Then, after a pause, "For now." Jane didn't look at him. She thanked Oates, and they walked out into the cold street. On the way home, the sky went the color of iron and the first real snow of the season began to fall. Not the thin, apologetic snow that had dusted the ground twice already, but a serious snow, the kind that means business, the kind that comes in sideways and makes the horses turn their heads and the world contract to the small radius of what you can see. They made it home with half an hour of daylight left, put the horses up properly, and by the time Jane pushed open the kitchen door, the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Elias brought in wood without being told, 3 armloads, enough to last the night. She put the kettle on and sliced what was left of the sourdough loaf and put butter on the table, and they sat across from each other in the lamplight with the storm pressing its weight against the windows, eating bread and butter and drinking tea that was too hot to drink quickly, so they drank it slowly. She thought about how a thing changes without announcing itself. How you look up one evening and the person across the table is no longer a stranger and is not yet something you have a word for, and the silence between you has learned how to breathe. She set down her cup. "Elias," she said. He looked at her. "The arrangement we made," she said carefully, "was for work, wages and the bunkhouse through winter." "It was," he said. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me the same way you answered that letter. No flourish. All right?" She put both hands flat on the table. "Is this—" She stopped, started again. "When spring comes and the syndicate matter is settled and the wheat's up, is there something here that keeps you, or do you go?" He was quiet for long enough that the stove popped once and settled. "I have nowhere that's calling me back," he said. "I haven't for a while. But that's not the same as an answer to what you're asking." "No," she said, "it isn't. What I can tell you," he said, measuring his words the way he measured everything, one at a time, nothing wasted, "is that I didn't come here looking for a wife. That was true when I wrote the letter. I came because I needed work, and I heard there was land that needed tending." He turned his cup once in his hands. "But I have been at this table most nights for 6 weeks, and I have fixed the chair and pulled the pump and read your husband's handwriting with you, and I am—" He stopped. "I am not in a hurry to leave." Jane looked at him. "That is not a declaration," he said. "I'm not trying to hand you a decision. I just—" He set the cup down. "You asked for no flourish. That's what I've got." She nodded slowly. Outside, the snow hit the glass. The lamp burned steady. "The bunkhouse is cold in January," she said. It was the most she could say, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it. "I can keep it warm enough," he said. "I know you can." A silence. Not the silence of 2 strangers figuring each other out, a different kind. "In the spring," she said, "if you're still here, and the place is still standing, and the syndicate's been sent off." She looked at the table, then back at him. "We could renegotiate the arrangement." "I'd be open to that," he said. No rush, no triumph, just the same steadiness he brought to everything. "Good," she said. And then, because she was Jane Aldrich, and she had always meant what she said, "I think you should know that I don't intend to be someone's problem solved, and I don't intend to be managed or handled or talked into anything." "I know," he said. "I've never once tried." She thought about it. He hadn't, not once, from the first moment at the gate. "No," she said quietly, "you haven't." The snow fell all that night and into the morning, and they kept separate quarters as they always had, and nothing was different except that everything had shifted slightly on its axis, the way a well-fitted door settles into true, not with a bang, but with a soft, definitive click. The county clerk's letter came in late January, its edges soft from travel, its language precise. The water right was found to be properly and unambiguously attached to Jane's homestead patent. The syndicate's claim was without legal merit. Garrett did not come back. His 2 decorative posts were never seen in Callow Creek again. The matter closed as cleanly as it had arrived. Jane read the letter twice and set it on the shelf beside Thomas's filing papers. She thought Thomas would have been satisfied by the argument. He had been a man who believed in doing things right. She hoped, in whatever quieter country he now occupied, that he could see the work had been kept up. Elias made no celebration of it. He said, "Good," when she told him, and went back to mending a section of the east fence line. She watched him work from the kitchen window for a moment, the steady, unhurried movements, the same assessment he had given the gate on the very first day, and she thought about what it meant to have someone who treated your home as a thing worth protecting, without treating you as someone who needed protecting. It was a distinction she had not known she was waiting for someone to understand. Spring came the way it does in that country, sideways and sudden and smelling of mud and sage and something clean underneath. The wheat came up even and green. The creek ran full and clear, right where it always had, untroubled. Elias began putting in a second kitchen garden without being asked. He had bought the seeds himself in town, she discovered, and simply started turning the ground. She stood at the garden's edge one April morning and said, "You didn't ask about that." He looked up. "I didn't want to make it a negotiation," he said. "I just thought," he paused, "you could use more greens in summer. Everybody could." She stood there a moment. Then, "I'm going to speak plainly." "I'd expect nothing else," he said. "I am not a romantic woman," she said. "I don't want poems or speeches. I don't want to be courted like a girl of 20. I want a partner, someone who fixes the chair and reads the fine print and knows the difference between my problem and our problem." She looked at him steadily. "I think that might be you. I don't know yet for certain, but I think it might be." Elias set down the spade. "I think it might be me too," he said. "Then I'd like to renegotiate the arrangement," she said, "like we discussed." "What terms?" he asked, not teasing, actually asking. "Equal say on the property," she said. "Equal work. You keep the name Croft if you want it. I keep Aldrich. We do this as two people who chose each other with their eyes open, not two people who stumbled into something and called it love after the fact." He was quiet a moment. The creek talked in the distance. A meadowlark somewhere made its long, curved whistle. "Those are fair terms," he said. "I know they are," she said. "I wrote them." There was something in his face then, not quite a smile, but the thing that lives behind a smile when a person is genuinely, quietly glad. "Jane," he said. "Elias, I accept the terms." She put out her hand. He shook it, a real handshake, firm and equal. Then he held it one breath longer than a handshake required, and she let him. They were married in May, in the Callow Creek Church, by a preacher named Aldous who kept the ceremony short because Jane had asked him to, and because he was a man who respected a direct request. Mrs. Calloway stood in the third pew and cried in a way that suggested she was taking some personal credit for the outcome. The county clerk Oates attended and brought a good bottle. The wheat was 3 inches high in the field. That evening Jane and Elias sat on the porch as the sky went from gold to purple to the deep blue that belongs to Nevada in May, and the mountains went dark at their edges, and the creek made its steady report down in the trees, and there was nothing that needed fixing or arguing or deciding, just for that 1 hour. He had put a second chair on the porch. She had not asked him to. It had appeared there one morning in March, and she had said nothing about it, and neither had he, because some things are said more clearly by being done than by being spoken. She sat in her chair. He sat in his. The night came on around them, quiet and full of stars. 9 men, he said without preamble. "Yes," she said, "and I never asked to come in." "No," she said. "You wrote a letter about work." "I did." A long, easy silence. It was the handwriting. she said. That's what made me write back. Careful, no flourish. He looked at her. That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my handwriting. Don't let it go to your head, she said. It's still barely legible. He laughed, a real one, low and warm, and the sound of it went out into the night and dissolved into all that wide Nevada dark. She looked at the stars for a while. He looked at them too. Their chairs were 3 feet apart, and that was exactly the right distance for two people who had chosen each other with their eyes open and intended to stay chosen. Some things settle into true, not with a declaration, but with the long patience of water finding its own level. And when they arrive there, when the door fits and the chair sits right and the work is shared and the silence has learned to breathe, you know it not because someone said so, but because nothing aches anymore. Jane Aldrich had built that gate herself, and she had kept it closed for 3 years because closing it was an act of self-knowledge, not stubbornness. She knew what she needed, and she knew that need was not a weakness. It was a standard. And the man who finally came through had not pushed or argued or shown up with furniture. He had written 2 sentences about work and waited to see if she would answer. She had answered, and that, more than any vow, was where it began. There is an old truth from those frontier years that this story carries, and it is simply this, that the right person does not try to solve you. They sit across from you and pick up their end of the problem and work alongside you until the thing is done. And then they stay because the work itself was good and the company was better. Jane knew 9 men before Elias. 9 men who came to her gate with their own picture of what she ought to be. She said no to all of them, not because she was difficult, but because she was clear. And Elias never tried to hand her a version of herself she hadn't agreed to. He wrote about work, he fixed the chair, he read the fine print, he put a second chair on the porch. He let all of it mean what it meant, slowly, without demanding she name it before she was ready. That is a love worth the waiting for, patient and plain, equal in every part. If you've ever held a standard that others called too high, don't let this story go past without asking yourself whether you, like Jane, simply knew your own gate. Leave a comment and tell us, have you ever said no to something that wasn't right, even when saying yes would have been easier? Your answer might be exactly what someone else needed to hear today. And if this story found you at the right moment, we would be grateful if you'd subscribe, so these Old West journeys can keep finding their way to you. There are more stories waiting, of homesteads and hard winters, and the kind of love that is built one quiet act at a time. Good night. God bless you, wherever this finds you.